Thank you very much for joining this session. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're enjoying this SQL Beats event. My name is Paweł Potasiński. I will tell you more about me in a second. But first, welcome at the Power BI plus Azure Synapse Analytics. All you need to start creating a unified analytics solution session. It's going to be, first, one of disclaimers here. First of all, it's a session that I planned for people who are not so familiar with Azure Synapse. So if you're super experts on Azure Synapse, that's probably not going to work for you. If you're a Power BI person, stay here. And if you want to learn Synapse or start learning Synapse and you want to find out how you can improve in learning Synapse, then this session is definitely for you. Let's start with adventure. I think that every one of us, as we sit here, are data professionals at some kind, right? And data professionals, they typically have some adventures, especially when you enter the analytics. If you work with analytical projects, you will face sooner or later the mighty dragon of data challenges. And the dragon will actually make everything to stop us from being successful on the analytical projects. So he will use lots of different techniques and problems to stop us. Probably the problems will start with basic stuff like big data. We'll see large amounts of data, not always structured, dealing with some semi-structured data, or even some binary data to analyze. But it's not just about the amount of data. It's also about the variety of data. Data is changing over time. It's of different formats, different kinds, coming with different velocity. It's not just the big data problem that we will face. The democratization of data, I know it may be a buzzword, but in reality, we see more and more people knocking to the doors of analytics, asking for business insights, and that's a reality. Also, there's a problem about architecture. If you build an analytical solution and you want to go pretty much end-to-end, then the architecture may get quite complex and may involve several services which often are not so great in integration, and that can create lots of silos, not just technical ones in terms of the skills that people have, and they have to talk to each other, but also silos in terms of the number of copies of the data you have to keep, and maybe also silos about the teams that are working on the data. One of the major problems of analytics is to make sure that IT people behind the project can really talk to business people and not do the project for their own. Because those projects that are run by IT without business context typically fail very quickly. Or maybe not quickly, but it's spectacular. Unfortunately, it's not everything that we'll face. Vendor lock-in is quite popular, and people are arguing that, hey, I don't want to have no way out. If I invest my money into some analytical solution, I need to have some strategic plan B, for going out of any cloud or whatever you have. So that's another problem we'll face. People will ask for that. That's an IT question, of course. And finally, what will probably make us doomed is a combination of speed. So you'll face business questions coming with speed, and you know there's going to be always more questions than you're able to answer, and also having in mind that the data quality is sometimes a challenge, and also maybe not that popular. If you look at the analytics, people want to see visuals, want to play with data, but security and compliance is something that you cannot really ignore, because sooner or later that will hit you. So some projects may fail because you will not provide solutions for those. Why am I showing this? Because maybe this adventure could have an alternate finish. What about if we have a support of unified analytics platform? Well, maybe this would end differently, because some of the problems that we face with data for analytics may be solved by a combination of skilled data professionals plus the platform. I'm not saying the platform is the most important factor, but it can impact how you can work with the analytics and how you can do the projects. So, hey, finally, it might be like this, and maybe we'll be successful. So please raise your hands, those of you who run analytics projects and had your old project successful. I'm not raising my hand either. Yeah. So you probably know the problems or some of those. So hey, I'm one of those professionals. One of you. I used to work for several companies before I joined Microsoft. Actually, I rejoined Microsoft recently, like 2 years ago. So I'm a senior program manager on the Azure Synapse Analytics product team, working with communities. So I'm in the right place here. With over 20 years of experience, my background is SQL. So when SQL bits were actually starting with their first events, I was one of the founders of what we used to call Polish SQL Server User Group, and it evolved into Data Community Poland. I'm not sure if you know SQL Day event in Poland, a little bit of advertisement for my friends. So I'm a former Microsoft MVP on SQL Server and Data Platform. So again, I used to think in SQL, and I'm not sure how many of you is SQL-based. Raise your hands, please. Yeah, I expect it. Power BI? Even more, thank you. That's a good audience. Okay, so if you want to connect, feel free to scan. This is actually a LinkedIn profile. So I'm also on Twitter, Paweł Potasiński. That's my hashtag. Okay, enough of that. So what is this session about? It's about Azure Synapse Analytics in reality. The Power BI is going to be here for a while. At the very end, I will talk about the integration and some features of Power BI that might be useful for combination of Azure Synapse and Power BI, but the skew will be towards Azure Synapse. Come on, I'm on the Synapse product team. So what is Azure Synapse and how this may help in putting all together the unified solutions for analytics? Well, if you look at this service, it's quite complex, but we try to make it quite end-to-end and easy to consume. So first of all, it's a cloud platform. It's a platform as a service in Azure that is actually combining the services, or let's say parts of components of the platform that allow you to combine everything into a single platform. By everything, I mean going from ingestion of your data, collecting the data from different sources, gathering them all together, typically gathering them all together in the data lake. It's not by accident that pretty much every single cloud vendor provides you with object cloud storage, which stores data in a quite inexpensive way. That's the same story about Synapse. Then, once you have the data, you can transform it using different techniques. Depending on the skills you have, you may bring to Synapse SQL experience. You may bring to Synapse Spark experience, so play with Python, maybe SQL, maybe Scala, maybe R even. And also, it brings you the runtime of Azure Data Explorer. If you're not familiar with Data Explorer, I'm not going to cover this today, but there is a session later on this afternoon. I'm having this session with Guy Reginano from ADX team, so join us to find out more about this service. So first, you're going to ingest the data, land it in the lake. Typically, you're going to work with different runtimes depending on skills and the requirements, and also it is covered by some layer of management and monitoring. So you can set up the whole access control for the platform in one place, keeping your security control over the whole platform, and it provides the UI that you can use, the web UI that you can use to access pretty much everything that you have in the platform, which is called Synapse Studio. That's the UI for Synapse. It's not the only way to actually work with Synapse. You can, because of the nature of SQL runtimes, you can access Synapse using quite popular Management Studio or Azure Data Studio if you wish. So again, the purpose of Synapse is to blend everything from data ingestion integration through data transformation up to data serving for the purpose of BI solutions, machine learning, and whatever you want to do for analytics. So typically, the combination of Synapse and Power BI is your combination for business intelligence and some enterprise solutions like warehousing, lakehousing, etc. Now, I don't want to run in the slides, so this is probably one of the last slides. What I will present in my demo will be quite popular recently architecture that is based on data lake and lakehouse, really. So we will go like this. I will ingest some data just to show you the look and feel behind the ingestion part of Synapse. We will use Azure Data Lake Generation 2, and why I will elaborate in a second. We will try to, first of all, ingest the data into the folder or container called bronze, which is just for storing the raw data. Then I will do some transformations to make it curated, to do some little touches, and maybe also reformat the data into some more fancy data format like Delta Lake. And then we will have serving layer called Gold, apologies, and we will share it for Power BI through Synapse serverless SQL pool. There's also an option to go with another option, dedicated SQL, but it's not going to be showed at my demo. Any questions so far? I know it's not the first session on Synapse and Power BI at this event. I'm probably last, but hopefully you'll find something interesting here. So, hey, speaking about demo, I will try to introduce how you can start working with Synapse. That's number one. Then I will ingest some sample data, and I will show you some sample data ingestion pipeline that is a bit more complex. Then I will try to show you how you can explore data in different ways, do some data engineering, and finally serve the data for Power BI, and then show some maybe colorful Power BI report at the end. So let me just switch to the demo. Last rows, how can you see this? Is it visible or so-so? Could be better? Should I improve the zoom? Okay, let me know if you need me to zoom in, okay? So let's start with how you can start with Synapse. First of all, you need to have Azure subscription. That's number one. So you can go with free trial, or if you have any MSDN subscription, that could work for you. And you just have to go to the Azure portal. So portal.azure.com is your direction. Once you get there and you log into the portal, you can quickly search for Azure Synapse Analytics as one of the resources to create. And you can simply create this one from the portal. Of course, there are different techniques to create resources in Azure. Some are code-based. This is the easiest way to create any resource in Azure. Now, the major things that you will have to define for Synapse is like this. The resource group is just the container that will store your resources, like Synapse Workspace. But the major things are here. Workspace name will be the name that will be encapsulated in every single endpoint for this workspace. So this is the name of your Synapse environment. The region defines where in Azure your Synapse workspace will be stored. So you should pick it as close to your location as possible, or the location of your business. That's how you define it. Now, there are lots of questions about why this thing is here. And it's actually an important part of this definition of Synapse Workspace. Every single Synapse Workspace requires me to define or create new Data Lake Storage Generation 2. What is this Data Lake Generation 2? It's an object storage based on HDFS concept, so distributed object storage, pretty inexpensive, or you can make it inexpensive in some ways. And it's great for analytics because of some of the optimizations, period. So whenever you create a new Synapse workspace, you will be forced to either choose or create new Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2. Why this storage is better than typical storage? Because it has hierarchical folders. So you can store your data, your files, in the folders that can operate with two aspects of security: role-based access control, which is defined in Azure, and ACLs, typical permissions to read, write, and execute on folders. Okay, so that's how you secure the data. I will not create a new Synapse workspace. Instead of that, I will move to my existing one. And once you have created Synapse workspace, the first step that you will probably do is to open Synapse Studio. So you will use this little button here, Open Synapse Studio, to open the UI for accessing and controlling Synapse Analytics. Also, pay attention to this little fragment of overview here, which define endpoints. Endpoints are crucial if you want to connect to Synapse Workspace from the external tools, like Power BI, for example. So in my case, I will be connecting to serverless SQL endpoint. So typically, I will just copy this endpoint from here using the copy to clipboard option. So now let's switch to the Synapse Studio. Synapse Studio is a web-based UI, as I mentioned. It allows you to work with Synapse. So how would you start with working with Synapse? First of all, you have to learn basics about the hubs. So those options on the left are hubs that allow you to jump between different sections, different aspects of working with analytics. You start with home, where you can learn. Then you move probably to data, where you can explore data lake or data lakes and work with your databases. Develop allow you to develop code, so SQL, Python. I will show you that in a second. Integrate is for integrations. There will be pipelines. So pipelines moving the data from point A to point B, typically to ingest the data into Synapse, but not just that. Then you have two tabs about monitoring and management, so administrative tasks. Okay. So let's start with how you would learn this thing. It looks pretty complex, and I said it's end-to-end. So first of all, do not ignore this little thing here, Knowledge Center. If you get there, first of all, you will be able to use samples immediately. So you can play with sample data that we present to you and play with different runtimes, Spark, SQL, whatever is your choice. But it's not all. Even better is here, Gallery. If you get to Gallery in the Knowledge Center, there are a bunch of examples, not just data sets. So you can play with, for example, billion of rows for New York City taxi data set, which is pretty much famous, I believe. Also some COVID data, maybe not that fortunate topic. But also you have code examples like notebooks or SQL scripts. So you can learn from this how to work with data using different techniques. Okay? I will not open any of the sample notebooks, but some of my code that you will see today is based on those sample notebooks, so I'm not going that far. So again, in the home page, do not miss Knowledge Center. It's a bit hidden, I know. It's not the visible button, but it's there. Now, let's start by ingesting the data. For the purpose of data ingestion, I will use open dataset, as I mentioned, New York City taxi, yellow cab. If you need the website, it's New York City gov/site/TLC, but really don't. You just put in the browser or in the search engine TLC trip record data, and you should be good. Or New York City yellow taxi data, and that should be okay. And I will just pick one of the files that is accessible here, yellow taxi trips records for January 2022. I will copy the link to this file. So my goal here is to take the file from the website and load it into my Synapse environment. That's number one. So I'll just quickly start with clicking on the ingest button. That's number one. The easiest way is to use the built-in copy task that I can run once or schedule to run periodically. I will use this simple wizard to create a connection, which is based on HTTP connector. But pay attention that here you have over 100 of connectors available for you. So you can connect to pretty much everything. I will connect to HTTP. Okay? Okay. Let's just create a connection. You can name it appropriately if you have naming convention in place. Let me just leave the default one, and I'm connecting using anonymous connection. This file does not require me to define any credentials. It's created successfully. Bang. So I'm good. I created the connection to the external file. Now it's time to define the format. Testing the connection. Please wait. Okay. Something's not right. Okay. Now the format is not guessed because the file is stored on the website, so I have to pick the format myself. It's Parquet. I know that. But if you copy the data, for example, from some storages, then the format will be actually suggested by the wizard itself. Now the connection to the destination, so where I want to put this data, is already here. Because when you create a workspace, it already has the predefined connection to your default data lake. So I just pick it, as easy as that. Now I have a browser that allows me to pick where my data will be copied to, and I pick my sandbox folder, open data sets, some New York City yellow taxi, trip small, boom. So there is a folder structure that I just have created before this demo. Clicking next, and I want to write it to Parquet, right? Sorry, one more thing, file name, it's important. Sorry. So I will name the file exactly the same as it is on the website. Okay, it's going to be Parquet format, nothing more to define, just click next, next. So as you can see, it's as simple as the installation of the application in Windows. And then it does several things. It creates everything from data sets and connections through pipeline that will be available for me to modify and improve, ending up with execution of this pipeline. So it's running this copy task, and I can actually go to monitor. Notice that I switched to monitor tab, and I'm not sure if it's visible, and I'm in the pipeline. Pipeline runs, and I can click on the pipeline runs by selecting my newly created pipeline. And I can see that it succeeded. So it actually can tell you even how much data was copied from point A to point B. Now, if I want to verify if the data is copied, I just go to data and try to navigate through my data lake. So there is a linked tab which contains connections to my data lakes. Again, I defined that I want to copy data into Sandbox, and here it is, my 2022-01 Parquet file. So after I have this data here, there's a super easy way to start exploring the data. I just right-click the file, and I create a new SQL script or notebook if you prefer working with Spark, and I can immediately query the data. So if I want to, for example, to show some sample rows from this data set, I just execute my select 100 rows SQL script, and it shows me the data. I can start exploring that further. Okay? So it's as easy as that, from getting data from anywhere to starting exploration. But it's not just it. So a second ago, I created a pipeline. Let me just show you this pipeline. It's a super easy pipeline. Just take the data from source. Again, this is my defined data set, to sync. And this is defined data set for sync. But I have also an opportunity to create more sophisticated pipelines. So this is an example of pipeline that is parameterized to get all the tables in specific schema in Azure SQL database to my Azure storage that works with Synapse. So the first step is just a loop, or sorry, it's just a lookup that executes a simple SQL statement. I'm pretty sure SQL people will tell me what it's all about. take the schema name and table name of every single table that sits in sales LT schema, okay? And then it just does the loop, that it takes every single table I'm passing from the first step and it copies it into Parquet format to my data lake. So this copy table as a source, see this, it takes parameterized table name and schema name. So every single execution will contain different table, in fact, and it puts the data taken from those tables into Parquet format in my data lake, again with parameterized names of folders and files. So I defined only 2 steps, and I copy 11 tables or so into my data lake with a single click. I just simply execute this by triggering my pipeline. And I can, again, jump into monitoring to see how it works. OK, I will check in a second if those tables were copied. I'm showing you this only for the purpose that you need to understand that pipelines can be super simple and super parameterized to do in parallel copies of multiple entities, like tables or files. But there are even easier ways to get the data into Synapse from very specific data sources. For example, if you're dealing with Dynamics 365 or Power Apps, or Power Platform, in fact, you can use a feature called Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse. So Dataverse is kind of database or storage for D365 applications and Power Platform, and it can be connected to Synapse quite easily without pipelines and complex ETL. So how this works? You need to go to makepowerapps.com, so the Power Apps website, and there you can have Azure Synapse Link. If it's not available after recent changes to the UI, you have to search for that. Or go to tables, and there is this option to just pin to the menu. But other than that, you should be good to go. And then the only thing you need to do is to create a new link. So you have to first create Synapse Workspace, have an existing Synapse Workspace. Important note is here, you need to store Synapse Workspace and your storage within specific regions that are stored in the same or very, very close region that your Power App region or environment, sorry. And then I create connection to existing Synapse Workspace as simply as by clicking several options. Next, I choose my table from Dataverse. Let's say I have a table, custom table called vendor. I select it and I save it, and that's it. I have already existing connection because it takes some time to create it. I have already existing connection, so what's the end result after I click save? Well, after I click save and get back to Synapse Studio, in my data, where I explore the data and work with databases, guess what? There is a database. There is a database called Dataverse Analytics Dem something. Dataverse is a prefix, basically. And in this database, I have a table called CRF38 vendor, which is a backend name for my table. And guess what? It contains the data from the Dataverse. Even more, it's being synced. It's being synced once the new rows come to the table. It's being synced with this database. So we have real-time analytics, almost real-time analytics for Dataverse available. Now, Synapse Link exists for not just Dataverse. It is also available to configure SQL Server or Azure SQL for Link. And also Cosmos DB has its own link. But every single Azure Link works differently. So Azure Synapse Link for Cosmos DB works differently from Synapse Link for SQL, works differently from Synapse Link for Dataverse, because every single database is different in its nature. So if you want to master Synapse Links, go one by one. Do not try to master them all at the same time, because they are different. But they are super simple to configure, and you can play with data quite soon. Now, why I did all this? Well, maybe because I want to combine the data from different sources, like some systems for storing this taxi trip data, maybe some other CRM or ERP systems, and combine them all together. So I showed you that you can query the files from this file explorer. Now, those queries can be quite complex, and let me just quickly show you that it's not just about querying Parquet files. So here are some examples. This first query takes all the files, spot the star here, it's a wildcard, every single file from some folder, every single file with Parquet extension, and I'm grouping those files, and I will show you first of all a year for each file, and spot that a year is actually a folder. My data is partitioned, so it's divided among different folders by year. Then I have also a file name taken from the file name function. So you have useful functions that may be used to filter the data, not just by the data in the files, but also the files themselves. And then I finally group the data, so just to show you how much data is in this data set. So in this data set, I have, I believe, 1.something billion rows. And it's visible here in the first row, 1.5 billion rows. So pretty much significant amount of data, right? And I can see how much data is in specific file as well. If you're somehow willing to work with CSV files, if you right-click on the CSV file in the Explorer, it will produce a script that you can enhance and then provide analytics. So this example script will run a query over CSV files. Again, a bunch of CSV files. And the result can be a table, but also it can be a chart. So you can change the data, the result into more visual thing and present the data this way, knowing that November is the most busy month in my data set. If it comes to work with JSON, again, right-click on the file, and it will produce this part immediately, without guessing what should be written in the SQL statement. The only thing you need to master is the set of functions for SQL that allow you to flatten JSON files. So in this case, I'm taking Google Analytics file, and I'm querying this to find out which browsers have been used against my website and how many hits were from each browser. So again, the result can be presented in a table or chart. OK, but is that the only experience I have for exploring data? No. Again, if you go to data and start develop by navigating to the sandbox and just right-click, you can create a notebook, load to data frame. Data frame is a kind of data set, or you can consider as distributed data set that Spark used to work with. So I'm not going to execute the notebooks, but I just want to show you the experience for Spark people. If you go to develop, you can create either a SQL script or notebook or even KQL script. But notebooks and SQL scripts are typically used for exploration and transformation of data. So I can go and explore data using notebooks. If I'm a Spark person, I use Python. And notice that notebook is a combination of code and Markdown. Markdown can be used to document things. So you can have documentation and code in the same place. In this example, I'm just taking the code that was auto-generated by Explorer, and then I enrich this code to do some transformations. If you know Python, it's quite easy. You just add additional columns. Then you can, for example, see the schema of your files. Now, is this notebook only for Python people? No. The good news is that you can actually do the following. You can take the data frame and save it to a table. Notice this save as table function. I'm saving the data frame taken from my data lake to a table that can be queried using SQL. It's not the same SQL as in SQL script I presented. It's a Spark SQL, but it's quite similar. I mean, there's no magic in writing select statements. Come on. Eh? So this one queries the data using SQL. Notice that I can switch to different languages in the notebook using magic commands. %% SQL switches to SQL. % Python switches to Python, right? And I can even visualize things or make things even richer because Spark allows me to import external libraries, like, for example, matplotlib, which is pretty common library for Python people, to visualize things that I have in data. So this chart comes from the external visualizations, okay? Thanks. Okay, so I explored the data. Let's say I answered some of the rapid questions. People just said, okay, I have this data, just let me know what's the insight. You can explore the data. You can even connect the result of your experiment saved to a query or to the file or to the table with Power BI. But to go more enterprise, you would be tempted to create a solution, one of the two solutions probably, warehouse or lakehouse. So in my case, this is going to be lakehouse. I will show you just sample notebooks, but you can go with using different techniques. Notebooks can be quite powerful because Python can do a lot better in some cases than SQL. You can write just a single line to get rid of all nulls or duplicates, for example. So here's a sample notebook. I know code is boring, but let's just have a pattern. So in this notebook, I'm doing this. I'm taking the data from my data lake that stores all the trips into a data frame called trip. Then, again, this code may be auto-generated. Like you right-click on the file or on the folder, and you generate the script for this notebook to start with. Then I'm doing this. Again, I told you at the beginning I'm a SQL person. I hate writing Python, so I move to SQL as soon as possible. That's my template, right? So I create or replace. So if it exists, I will replace it. A temporary view. A view is just an abstraction layer on files, but it's based on SQL. So I can query that just as tables. So once I have the view, it's super easy for me to go with the SQL query that will create. You can also create views using SQL. So I load the data, the original raw data, into one view. Then I create another view with curated data just by using SQL. So you can create view from select statement with transformations, if you like SQL. And then finally, after I have this curated view, I can write the data back to the data lake, which is here. So I'm using this. First of all, I decide to write data in the Delta Lake format, which is super fancy format for analytics because it has some features like support for transactions, time travel, so you can get back to the previous versions of your data. So just use this format whenever you can for curated and gold layer of your lakehouse. That's the practice we have right now for Synapse. And I save it to the new folder, right? And that's pretty much it about curation. I do this for every single part of my data set, for every table, right? Then I have another step that is called dimensional model because Power BI people love star schemas. Actually, this little figure of data professional, he was holding the star schema in his hand, right? So in this case, what I'm doing is this. I load the data from my curated zone. After I added columns, I got rid of bad quality data to another data frame. Again, I move as quickly as possible to views, just to have my data ready for querying in SQL. And then I create a database and tables using create table as select statement. So notice that I'm not creating any table using predefined schema. The schema will be defined based on the query that I'm using here, right? But it's just producing me a table, right? And that can be a technique for SQL people. On tables based on Delta Lake format, you can run updates, merges, and deletes. So it's an update table, right? It's not static. So over time, you will be able to append your data and modify it. And once we're done, there is a database created, which is available here in the data hub, and it's called Taxi Lakehouse, which contain my tables and also some covering views if I want to present people with some layer covering tables. But it's that easy. I mean, I moved through 3 layers using different techniques, and finally I present tables. So now it's time to use Power BI, right? If you ask me, can I do the same with SQL? Almost. You can create a SQL script and a server SQL database that does pretty much the same. It loads the data from data lake, and it writes data back using create table as select, create external table as select in this case. And that's also one technique. There are some things missing. You can't partition data, for example. So be mindful about picking the technique, because Spark can be more powerful when working with Delta Lake. And once I have this, some comments about what I've done so far. First of all, notice that before I started querying data, I haven't created any kind of database. I just had a server SQL engine that was ready to go. I just queried the data. That's number one. Number two, I was able to explore the data lake that is under the Synapse, but you can also attach different data lakes. That's number two. So you have very fast way to explore the data that is in the file system. Also, I'm not sure if you noticed, but here, if you open the container, there is this little option called Upload, which allows you easily upload the data from your PC. That's the easiest way to start working with Synapse. You just have to treat it as OneDrive. You treat data lake as OneDrive. But of course, you have to keep your data lake in order, not to create data swamp. And those are major topics here. And everything was done pretty much visually and quite quickly. So let's go to Power BI. First of all, there is this option in the homepage called Visualize. It's visible, so let me click that. This option allows me to connect to Power BI workspaces. So if you're Power BI developer, you can create a connection to the workspace in your Power BI tenant, like here. And once I create that, it does several things. First of all, in the Manage tab, it creates a connection to Power BI. Notice here, Power BI workspace, that's created. I will publish that to make sure that it lands in my code repository behind Synapse workspace. And then, after I switch to Develop Hub, notice that, we have not just SQL scripts and notebooks, but also Power BI. And my workspace is visible here. Even more, I have access to the data sets that sit in my workspace, and I can base my report on the existing data sets. Those data sets, by the way, are connected to the existing lakehouse, so it's basically using the same data. And I can quickly create the exploration using Power BI experience. Let me just create simple report based on maybe, I don't know, years. And I have some measure here in the fact trip called passengers. Let's see how many passengers were traveling by year. Boom, there you go, you have visual, as easy as that. And this is, of course, interactive report. Even more, you can save this report back to Power BI workspace as a temporary report, because it's not the full-blown Power BI experience, for sure. But it's even more. You can start, when you are in this workspace, you can start playing with creating new data sets as well. So you will switch to Power BI Desktop at some point, right? And here, the connection is done by connecting just to SQL Server. I took the endpoint that I showed you at the very beginning, put it as a server name, connected using Azure AD credentials, and created this report. So this report actually works quite smoothly, which is interesting because I have 1.5 billion rows in this data set. So how it works actually, how Power BI supports working with Synapse and those data sets. So it actually, if you go to the modeling, I created an aggregation table in my Synapse environment. So I have not just fact table that is big enough and I have 1.5 billion rows, but also I have here an aggregation table. So Power BI for the fact table allow me to define something called aggregations. So I created aggregations, and when people click on the report and refer to the aggregated part, to the aggregated queries over my fact table, they really touch the smaller table that have like a couple thousands of rows. Yeah, cheating, but pretty much impressive. Why I'm doing this? Because I don't want people to go to billion of rows in my serverless going straight to the data lake. That will cost money and will be not very performant. So I'm using Power BI import mode as a caching layer for my serverless SQL. Can we apply the ML operation like update querying to incoming Salesforce data? I'm not the Salesforce expert. But I would say this. Every single data set, every single data source, if you're able to provide some kind of timestamp, so when it comes with a kind of timestamp when the data was updated or created or whatever, can be managed in a way that you create some kind of changing dimensions or changing data. So you just seek for those rows that have timestamp above your last notified timestamp for the operation, for pipeline, and you have your modification isolated, right? So yes, it's possible if only the system either supports changing data or, let's say, change data capture by default, or it provides timestamps. There's no magic. Also, notice that in this report, I can go to the direct query mode. I have the second card here called details, and this one does not work that well. So again, if you want to deal with large volume of data in your lakehouse or data warehouse, and you don't know what's going on behind Power BI, working with direct query mode, there's this fancy new mode called it's optimized, right? So let's just go and do query reduction. Got it. Sorry. Query reduction. It should be good. Sorry. I should be doing this. Pause visuals. Sorry. Yes, let me pause visuals. So I'm not sending queries right now. Every single visual sends some SQL query, right? So now I can play with single queries. I can just take one query, and then I have some options to just play with a single query using this optimize button. I will just skip this demo. It's not the most important. So now I have not much time. I want to wrap it up. You saw some of the parts just to scratch the surface of Synapse. Apologies. That's a beast. It's not that complex once you start working with this and you learn several basics. But it can solve several problems. What I want you to memorize from this session, you can build end-to-end analytics using the combination of Power BI and Synapse. Synapse is for storing large data, and you serve the data products for Power BI from Synapse using different techniques, different endpoints. Then it is extensible and open. I was storing pretty much everything in the data lake in open source formats, Parquet and Delta Lake. That can be consumed by pretty much everything, Databricks, Presto, whatever engine you have, right? Your machine learning data scientists will be able to access data lake zones. It's intuitive because it has web UI. You don't have to memorize every single query. You just have to right-click on the file, and it will produce sample code for you. There is also knowledge center with samples. And which I didn't show you today, but it's a complex topic. There are lots of solutions to cover compliance and security in Synapse. You can protect it from the external access, for example. You can isolate the workspace to work only within your well-defined network architecture. Okay, apologies. I will have to take questions. In the meantime, grab your phones and scan this QR code for some Synapse resources. I hope you find them useful for learning Synapse. Questions?
In your demo, you used data frames. You can also use views
Yeah.
to present to Power BI.
Yeah.
You don't have to go via data frames.
So there are two ways. One is when you save the data to the Delta Lake table. Delta Lake tables can be accessed and queried by serverless SQL. So you just use serverless SQL endpoint to go to Spark tables. Yes, that's number one. But even, I would say even more fancy way is, because of security reasons, is to save the data not to tables, but to the data lake, to the gold layer, and go directly to the data lake from serverless SQL, and also create views. So in this case, you will create views using select as open row set, the statement that I've been using for querying the data. And it's better because you have more granular permissions there. Okay? If you prefer to grant permissions on SQL level, then serverless SQL databases are better than lake databases. Okay? Questions? Was it too bad, or? I hope you find it useful. There are lots of resources on Synapse. What I encourage you to start with is this section, call to action. YouTube channel, you have some celebrities available for some chit chats here. You have blog. Pretty much everything that you need to start with Synapse is YouTube channel. Go there. There are some essentials video series that will bring you through several steps how to learn this. Please fill your surveys about this session to help me improve my presentations. I hope you like it. And sorry, 1 second more. And thank you. If you have questions to get offline, feel free to ask. Enjoy your SQL Beats. Thank you.